Good evening, everybody. This is our Wednesday night Bible study as we're walking through our adult Sunday school literature. Explore the Bible. If you've got it, you can follow along. If not, we'll be in Luke chapter 6 tonight. And we're just kind of been walking through Luke. And of course, during the Christmas season, we've talked about a lot of the Christmas story of Jesus that Luke talks about. And now we're kind of in the ministry part of Jesus and in the teachings of Jesus. And so we're going to look at something that's pretty applicable tonight based on what happened last week at our Capitol, based on what's happened in politics, based on what's happened in our world, even over the past year, not counting COVID. Everything that's been happening. This today is pretty applicable and it fits right in. And it's going to be a good challenge, I believe, for all of us. So, real quickly, we're just going to walk through just a few verses here in chapter 6, kind of share a little bit about what they are, but they're real self-explanatory. That's why we're not going to spend a lot of time on it tonight, because I want you to go back and I want you to pray about it. I want you to go back and read some more about it. I want you to research it. I want you to think about where you are yourself in this whole thing that we're going to talk about tonight, the stuff we're going to talk about, because I believe even the best of Christians, I believe, struggle with what we will talk about tonight, and that's compassion. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't compassionate people out there. I'm just saying even the most compassionate person, when looking at compassion from a godly perspective, probably has challenges even with being compassionate. Even if that's a spiritual gift of theirs, I would say that some people would have problems with the compassion that Christ requires of us. So if you've got your Bible or your Sunday school book, Luke chapter 6, we're going to start in verse 27. Here's what Jesus says. He says, "But I say to you who listen, love your enemies, do what is good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who mistreat you. If anyone hits you on the cheek, offer the other also. And if anyone takes away your coat, don't hold back your shirt either. Give to everyone who asks from you, and from someone who takes your things, don't ask for them back. Just as you want others to do for you, do the same for them." Now, actually, we're in Luke's representation of the Sermon on the Mount, and obviously Matthew has the bigger representation of that. It's not exclusive in Matthew. There's a lot that parallels here in Luke. Now Matthew does have, since it's longer, it's 3 chapters worth. Matthew does have some stuff in the Sermon on the Mount that you don't necessarily see in Luke. But again, these are two guys remembering what Jesus said, and putting down the most godly of things that they thought that the world needed, and that we needed, and that they were inspired by the Holy Spirit to write. And so these are not just men just writing down things that they want. These are men that are inspired by the Holy Spirit, each with their own personality and their own writing styles. And so that's the interesting thing about Scripture. It's pretty neat, actually. But we're in Luke's account of the Sermon on the Mount, and he says in verse 27, something that would have been a shock to them. And a lot of the Sermon on the Mount would have been a shock to those that were listening. And I'll say this, and I don't know if you realize this about the Sermon on the Mount. Sermon on the Mount was really a teaching to the disciples. If you look in Matthew's account, it says that Jesus, he sees a bunch of crowds, and so he walks up away from them with his disciples, walks away from the crowds, up on this hillside, and starts teaching his disciples. Now, obviously, if they know he's there, the crowd, they always follow Jesus, so they're following in. So by the end of the Sermon on the Mount, he's got a big crowd around him again, but he's really teaching the disciples. He's teaching those that are closest to him. And so for us today, we look at the Sermon on the Mount, and it's for us, I believe. It's for those of us that are closest to Jesus, those of us that have a relationship with Jesus. And he wants us, if we say we're living for him, he wants us to live the right kind of life. And we see that through what he talks about starting in verse 27. Now, Jesus, when we're talking about being compassionate, and not a worldly compassion, although there's some things we can learn from worldly compassion, but we're talking about a godly kind of compassion. There's some things that are different. There's some things that are kind of shocking there. And Jesus brings up, when he's talking about this, talking about how to treat people and how to be compassionate, he brings up 4 specific actions, and they're all kind of shocking in themselves. And we're going to look at them real quick. Love your enemies, he says first. Now, we think of enemies and we think of people we might fight against, or people that we, not that we don't see eye to eye with them, but even greater than that, people that maybe we even feel like we hate. But that's not necessarily just an enemy. An enemy is really the unlovable people in your life, the people that you just don't focus on love when you hear them. It can be somebody who you have on your Facebook profile and you scroll down and they've put something just crazy, whether it's political, whether it's social, whether it's something biblical that's just crazy, that's not right. Their take on anything, on what's going on in the world, whatever it is, and you always see it and you're like, oh, there they go again. I can't get with that. Well, that person, you might not consider them an enemy, but really, if you don't have love for that person, that's an enemy in God's eyes. And so he's saying to love those people that are most unlovable in our life. Now, you probably have people in your family like that. You probably have people at your work like that. You probably have a neighbor that's like that. Maybe you have people in your church, wherever you're listening from today, whatever church you attend. Maybe you have people in your church that you feel like are like that. And he says to love them. And he doesn't he doesn't go very much further than that in how we should love them. And I don't think that's the important part. I think the important part is that we have to know we should love them. Jesus is just saying, listen, I'm not going to give you a big list of things to do for them. And he will give them a few things here in a second, we'll see. But he's not going to give them a big, huge list of things and say, these are all the things you can do to love your enemies. He wants us to figure it out. He wants us to care enough and to pray enough and to figure this thing out. How do we love those that are unlovable in our lives? I think I told you all this story, maybe my very first Sunday here, or the Sunday that I was voted on, maybe even. But there was a gentleman in a church I was at one time, and I was just a youth pastor, and I had to tell that guy, and I told him I was going to do it, and I told him why I would do it, but I had to tell that guy that I loved him every time I saw him, and I only saw him at church. But if I'd have seen him at Walmart, I'd have done the same thing. I had to tell that guy every time I saw him that I loved him, because if I didn't do that, it would be pretty tough for me to love him. And it was still, to be honest, just to be completely honest, it was still tough for me to love that guy. But the more I told him I loved him, number one, I think it softened him up. Number two, it made me really believe that I loved the guy. The more I told him that, and the more I put my arm around him and just pat him on the back and said, man, I just want you to know I love you. It was hard at first to do that, but the more I did it, the more he became a lovable person for me. I could eventually, and now I do love this guy, and I don't have to tell him every time, but it was something that I would see. I would see him, and little by little he would become. I might be able to get along with this guy. I might be able to really love this guy, and he was more and more lovable as time went on. But we have to share that kind of love, that kind of godly love that loves his enemies. We've got to share that kind of love with others. And you know why we can do that? Do you know why I can go to a guy and tell him that I love him? Because otherwise I would probably have hated him. Do you know why we can do those things? Do you know why Jesus told us to love our enemies? Why we can do that? Not why we should, but why we can do that? Well, it's easy. It's because we have the love of God in our hearts. If we're Christians, if we are really Christians, then we've got the love of God in our hearts. And so if we've got it, we can share it. If we have that love, if we've experienced that godly love, we can share it even with those that are enemies, those that are most unlovable in our lives. The second thing he tells us to do is he says to do what is good. Love your enemies. Do what is good to those who hate you. That's the second thing, to do what is good. Now, when we love, when we say we love, then that means we show that we love, and that means that we act on that love. So that's why he's saying to love your enemies, and then he follows that up by saying, do what is good to those who hate you. I told you he didn't really give a laundry list of things that we could do to love our enemies, but he gives us a real kind of a vague way to do it, to love our enemies, but it makes sense. You want to love your enemies? Do what's good to those who hate you. Do what's good to those who are unlovable. Do what is good. It's a love that is followed by action. And really, you could say it like this: do what is good to those who hate you on purpose, or intentionally do what is good to those who hate you. That's really another way to read that verse. When we love, we don't just love because God loved us. We do that, but we make it an intentional effort to love people. We make an intentional effort to do what is good to those to do what is good for those who hate us. We love on purpose. We do good on purpose. Then he says, going on, verse 28, bless those who curse you. Bless them. Pray for them. Love them again. And then he goes on further and he says that. He says, pray for those who mistreat you. He's telling us the most unlovable people in our lives, and the disciples would have looked at each other like, this dude is crazy. But he's telling us to be like him and to show a godly kind of compassion and love. He says to love the people that are most unlovable, and he says to do good for them on purpose, find a way to intentionally do good for people, bless them and be a blessing to them even, I believe that means, and pray for them. It's not just one, because it would be easy to say, well, pray for your enemies. Well, yeah, I can do that. I can pray for people. I can, my prayers might go from, God, would you, would you show them that they're wrong, change their view on things? It might even go from that to, God, will you let their car stop today so that they can know that that they're not doing right? I don't know. I don't know that I would really pray that. But our prayer's dangerous, because we start talking, we can get real selfish real quick. But if you go beyond prayer, you ought to pray. You try to be a blessing to people. You do what is good for those who hurt you, and you do it on purpose, and you love those that are most unlovable. Then we're starting to get that compassion thing under control. We're starting to learn a godly kind of compassion. All right, now look in verse 29, because he goes, now he starts giving a list of some things we can do. He's given some examples of what these things might look like when we love people, when we do what's good for people, when we are a blessing to people, when we pray for people. Here's what that might look like. He says, if anyone hits you on the cheek, turn them the other one also. Now, he's not talking so much, and it was a physical thing a little bit, but he's not talking about somebody giving you a haymaker on the cheek. He's not talking about that. That was just being smacked on the cheek was just a sign of insult back then. It was a very cultural. That was a very cultural thing for Jesus to say to them, but that was a sign of insult. So Jesus is really saying, when somebody insults you, let them insult you again. That's fine. It's not going to hurt. It's not hurting you. Somebody smacks you on the cheek, it's not going to hurt you. Turn it and let them do the same thing. He doesn't say fight back. He doesn't say, now he's not saying be passive, and we'll talk about that in a second. But he's not saying get fired up every time somebody says something bad about you, or every time somebody posts something on Facebook that's not nice about you or one of your beliefs. He doesn't say go on there and respond to everything you see. He doesn't say that. He says to turn your other cheek. He's talking about being patient with people. He's talking about having a spirit of forgiveness with people. Then he goes on and he says, if somebody takes away your coat, give them the shirt off your back. Don't let them stop. If they really need your coat, give him your coat. Don't go back after it. In fact, he's saying give him your shirt also. That's the compassionate reaction, right? That would be compassionate. Somebody steals my jacket, and I go after them, and I take the cops with me, and I make a big scene about it, and just go crazy about it. Maybe I run them in the ground on Facebook. Maybe I talk about them when I go to the grocery store to everybody, whatever it might be. Maybe all my friends know about it. He's saying don't do that. He's saying give them your shirt as well. Be compassionate. And again, worldly compassion would be, well, I need to take that person and buy them some clothes. And maybe you do need to go buy them some clothes. Or worldly compassion would be, well, I need to let the police handle this and put them in jail and let them learn from their mistakes so that they can become a better person. Maybe that's worldly compassion. Godly compassion is different, and it's not popular. Godly compassion is not popular. Even amongst Christians, it's not popular. Somebody steals your coat, the compassionate reaction would be to give him your shirt as well. That's not anything that most Christians would want to do or would do. Sometimes we get it right. I remember a time in ministry, we had about $1,000 worth of stuff stolen out of our shed out back at a parsonage I was at. About a week before that, or a few days before that, I had given some people some food out of our own freezer, and the guy was in there, and I could tell he was kind of looking around. Well, him and his wife didn't come to church for another couple of weeks. Well, in that meantime, every time they came to church, they wanted something, and we gave them stuff. We gave them the church gave them stuff. Lindsay and I gave them stuff out of our own freezer, out of our own food and stuff. I mean, we did what we could for them, and we helped them out. Well, about 6 weeks passed from the time stuff was stolen, and I was pretty sure it was them, just the way he was looking around. And I could be totally wrong. If I am, I'm forever sorry for thinking that they did that. But I really think that they did it. I really do. And about 6 weeks later, this couple walks back into the church on a Sunday night for a Sunday night service. And I thought, here they are. They want something again. And they just stole from me. Like, they stole $1,000 worth of stuff out of my shed. Chainsaws, 2 chainsaws that were my papaws that were not worth a lot in themselves, but sentimentally were worth a whole bunch to me. They stole a $150 turkey hunting vest. And that's not a lot of money, but it was something that I used and something that I enjoyed, had calls and stuff in it, something that I loved to do back then, and it was just a lot of stuff like that out of a shed that I guess they could turn around quick, but I was 99% sure that these people had done it, and so I was ready to confront them after the service, and I don't even know what I preached on that night or the Bible study was on, I don't know. But after the service, after I had said amen, I was still ready to get them. I was still ready to confront them about it and ask them if they had stolen my stuff. And as they're walking up to me, I'm thinking, yeah, here they come. They're going to come ask for something. Here they come. And so they come up and they start asking. We really need some gas in our car. It's been a little bit since we've been by here, and we've been trying to do better, but, we just need some gas in our car. And it was at the moment I was getting ready to respond that I thought, I just need to love these people. I just need to help them out. I need to try to be compassionate, because within myself, I'm not real compassionate. And so I followed them into town. I got them a little bit of gas, and I came home. And I told Lindsay, I said, I just put gas in the car of 2 people that I think stole my stuff. I couldn't believe I did that. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought, well, that would have been the godly thing to do. And so even those that are not so much compassionate can get it right sometimes. And I've gotten it wrong a lot more than I've gotten it right. But that's just one example of what it looks like for somebody to take your coat and you to give them your shirt as well. It's not easy, but it's the godly thing to do. He's not telling us to be passive in our response to people. He's not telling us to be people who don't react. He's just saying that when we do react, to react with compassion. That's not passivity. That's just reacting with compassion, reacting with godliness. That's what he's asking us to do. And then he says to give to everyone and don't ask anything back from them. And you look at that and you say, well, why would I give to everybody? And what good does that do? And that just sounds like welfare. And the church ought to do that. The church people ought to be. We ought to not have to have welfare in our communities, because the church ought to take care of people. But that's so far gone now that the church hasn't done their job, and Christians haven't done their job, not only to give people stuff, but to give them jobs and to help them in their homes and to do all that stuff. We've gotten away from that, from what the early church did, to take care of each other. And so now the government's had to come in and take care of that, and they don't do a very good job with it. So we lost that. Especially in the American church, in American Christianity, we've lost that. But he tells us to give to everyone. Psalm 24 tells us that everything that we have is God's anyway. So when that's the thought in our minds, that everything is God's, and when we have a compassionate heart, the way God would have us to have a compassionate heart, in a godly way, then when we give away, we're just giving away things that are God's. We're just giving back to people things that God has given to us. And then verse 31, you know it as the golden rule probably. It says, just as you want others to do for you, you do the same for them. Matthew 7:12 is where it is in the other Sermon on the Mount. And again, this is not a passive statement. This is why we know Jesus is not a passive type person. He wants us to react, but he wants us to react in a godly, compassionate way. And the golden rule is no different. There are other religions in the world, and other leaders of religions, other writers, other philosophers, not theologians, but philosophers, who have said things similar to this. But I say similar because this says, just as you want to do for others, do the same for them. Everybody else's stuff is from a negative connotation. Don't do to other people what you don't want them to do to you. Don't do this if you don't want it to happen. That's what all the other ones say. This is the only saying like this that's positive and it's full of action. He's saying, just as you want others to do for you, you do that first. That's what he's saying. Jesus is saying, if you want to solve all this, if you want compassion, if you want forgiveness, if you want godliness in your life, then you do that to others. You do that to others. That's not a very passive thing to say for Jesus. Jesus is saying, put action behind this compassion that you have. Put action behind this love that you have, and do it for others first. Then he goes on in verse 32. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. Verse 33, if you do what's good to those who are good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do that. And if you lend to those from whom you expect to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners to be repaid in full. He's saying, they could have looked at that and said, well, I love people. I love some people. I give to some people. Well, I do good to most people. And Jesus is saying, people that aren't even godly do that kind of stuff. It's just that's a moral thing. People that aren't godly do that kind of stuff. He says in verse 35, but love your enemies. He says it again. Do what is good. Lend expecting nothing in return. Then your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High. For he is gracious to the ungrateful and evil. There's a example of how we can be gracious to the ungrateful. Be merciful just as your Father is also merciful. Love in itself is not enough. Well, I love people. Well, that's not enough. Doing good, it's not enough. If you say, oh, I'm just going to do good. I'm just going to try to do good. That's not enough. Being somebody who gives to certain things is not enough. I know people who do all three of those things and do them well. I know people that love a lot of people. And I know people who do good to a whole bunch of people for a whole bunch of organizations. And I know people who give thousands of dollars to organizations cancer organizations and Red Cross and food banks and you name it, give thousands of dollars, but none of that is good enough. It's not good enough. We love, we do good, and we give in the way that Jesus would do it. And that's where it's different. Loving is not enough. You say, well, I love people. Well, that's not enough because you probably don't love people like Jesus loved people. He says that, even in here, he says that one way he loves is that he's gracious to the ungrateful. How many of us would be gracious to people who are ungrateful to us? Those are the things that Jesus does. And we're not going to spend a lot of time on this because I want you to go back and study these verses for yourself. Read Luke chapter 6. These sections we're talking about, starting in verse 27 especially. And see what Jesus would do. And then apply that to your life. And then now turn to verse 37 as well. And we're going to end with this. He says, do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Now, you say, don't judge, and that means, well, what, I can't say something's right or wrong? No, that's not what that means. Do not judge means don't be the judge that Jesus is. Don't be the judge that God is. God is the ultimate judge, and we're not. God has all the answers, and we don't. God knows all the rules, and we don't, okay? So, Jesus was perfect, and we're not. So we can't be the kind of judge that he was. The way we do this is we kind of sit back in our pious way, in our better than you way, and we act like we've got it all together, and we start picking and choosing people that don't have it together like us, we feel like. We've done that for the past year to people. We've seen people that have posted stuff or that have done stuff or that have said stuff, and we say, well, I don't like that, and I don't like this, and I think they're wrong. And we sit back and judge them as wrong when we've not been gracious to them. We've not been compassionate to them. He says, do not condemn and you won't be condemned. Instead of condemning, why don't we restore people? Why don't we be gracious to people? Why don't we be compassionate to people? Why don't we love people? He says, don't condemn, but restore. Because we can't condemn. We can't condemn anybody. That's only Jesus that does that, based on whether we believe in him or not. And if we start thinking about that in our own terms, is the way that we live and the way that we're showing compassion and love to people, does that show that we have a relationship with Jesus? Does that show that we've given our lives to Jesus? We have got to challenge ourselves with those thoughts. He's saying forgive and you'll be forgiven. In other words, he's saying have a forgiving spirit. Forgive because you've been forgiven, is what he's saying. Have that forgiving spirit because you've been forgiven. And we do all these things. We don't judge and we don't condemn. And we are people who forgive because we've received all of that from God. We have the example right in front of us. So that's why we do those things. That's why we're expected to do those things, because we've had it done to us. And then in verse 38, he says, give and it will be given to you. Here's some action. Give, he says, and it will be given to you. Don't give restoration, give compassion, give love. Those are the things he's talking about giving. He's not talking about giving money. He's talking about giving all those other things. Give forgiveness, and it's going to be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over. You know what it means. You get certain ingredients. You have to push them down to get the proper measurement, right? Brown sugar. I love brown sugar. You get a cup of brown sugar. You don't just scoop it out and go, oh, well, there's a cup, and pour it in. No, if your mama taught you right, and mine did, you push it down. You push it down. I pushed it with my fingers. If you're fixing it for somebody else, maybe use a fork or something, please. But you push it down, and you put a little bit more on top, and you push it down, right? He's saying do that. Shaking together. When you shake things, they settle, and you can put more in there, right? And he says you'll do that, and what you are given back will be filled up, plus it'll be running over, will be poured into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured back to you. If you give people that much compassion and that much grace and that much love, just a little pinch, that's all you're going to receive back. That's not me. That's Jesus talking. If we have a big old tub full of forgiveness and love and compassion for people and understanding and restoration, then you know what we get back? That's the kind of stuff we get back. And it's not just us from God getting it back. That's us from society getting it back. If the church, if Christians are known as compassionate and in a compassionate way that nobody else can understand, people are going to look at us different. If the church is known for forgiving and forgiving in a way that nobody understands, instead of judging and shouting and responding to everything we don't agree with on social media and talking about things we see on the news that are biased anyway, whether each side you're on or not, it doesn't matter. When the world sees us forgiving in the midst of all of that in a way they can't understand, they see us differently. They treat us differently. When they see us loving in a way that they just can't understand that we would love, they see us differently. And so I think that's the challenge for us as a church. I think it's a challenge for us individually. And I think we ought to go back. I think you ought to go back and read Luke chapter 6, starting about verse 27. Read that stuff again and pray over it. And pray for God to show you the exact way He wants to use you. Lord, how do you want me to be compassionate today? How do you want me to love others today? How can I forgive somebody that seems unforgivable today? How can I love my enemies, the people that are most unlovable to me? How can I love them today? What can I do? You ask Him those things and He'll show you. So I hope you enjoyed that tonight. You've got some homework to do. I do too. We're going to go back this week. I'd say go back and read that stuff in Luke chapter 6 again and pray over it. See where the Lord would want to use you for His glory this week to be somebody who's compassionate and loves and forgives and gives in all those ways that Christ did. We'll see you on Sunday. Until then, have a good week, and we'll see you then.